So I think it's worth starting the discussion about Access, something maybe we don't really know a lot about, as Access is a database. We should start talking about something that we do know something about, and that is an Excel spreadsheet. I know that we have covered in a different section here spreadsheets and using Excel, and I know that there's kind of like a honestly like a stigma that comes along with Excel because it's a boring piece of software. You can have your opinions as to that, but it is absolutely positively true that Excel is the number one business software on the planet. Everybody uses it, every business uses it, our school uses it all the time, all day, every day in order to communicate data. And the reason it's really good at communicating data is because it's all very, very regularized. When you look at an Excel spreadsheet, it is rows and it is columns, and data is formatted into those rows and columns in a way that makes it really easy for you to derive information from looking at just raw data. But there's a bunch of really crucial restrictions that are baked into an Excel spreadsheet. Number one, there's only one Excel spreadsheet. So if somebody is entering data into an Excel spreadsheet, that means that nobody else can be entering or removing data from that Excel spreadsheet. Because if that was to happen, we couldn't trust the data that resides in that Excel spreadsheet any longer. So if you can't trust the data, that means you don't have any data at all. So there's only one person allowed in an Excel spreadsheet. Is it true that we can have the same spreadsheet with the same data, but represent worksheets in a workbook that would go like backwards in time? So what do I mean by that? Could we have a class, CIS 102, and we could call it CIS 102 is our workbook. And then each worksheet in our workbook would be a specific class for a specific semester. So let's say that sheet number one is your class in our Excel spreadsheet. So CIS 102 this semester. But we've had CIS 102s in previous semesters, right? We actually have numerous courses of CIS 102 running this semester. So each worksheet in our workbook would represent the names and the grade data for everybody who is enrolled in CIS 102. And what we would see is over time, we can compare one worksheet to another to see what kinds of like grade data it is that we're getting in there. So if there's a particular assignment that really beats up on you guys, we would maybe modify or remove that. But the challenge there is that somebody, so like an actual instructor or somebody else would have to come in and actually go worksheet through worksheet, workbook through workbook, and find and identify those trends. That might work for CIS 102. It would be a big job, but it's certainly something that we could do. But if you think about a really big service, if you think about like Rock Valley College as a whole, there are tens of thousands of assignments. There are hundreds of thousands of, assignments, classes, and semesters that we would put together over the course of just a few short years. And we could never keep on top of all of that data. So a spreadsheet really doesn't help us out with that. The other problem with the spreadsheet, and the last one that we'll talk about here, is that in a spreadsheet, so nice orderly rows and columns that everybody really does, I think, appreciate how to get data into and information out of. The trouble with an Excel spreadsheet like that is the the single spreadsheet that we have can do calculations, but when we do a calculation in a spreadsheet, it has to be saved to somewhere. So we would need to take another tab and have like a set of calculations in a new worksheet. We would have to put at the bottom of a particular set of rows and columns, we could put totals and accumulators, so like adding up as we go along. Certainly we can do crazy data things with Excel. They're called pivot tables. I know we talked about them in that previous Excel chapter. But the trouble is those have to reside somewhere. They all represent data that had to be entered into that Excel spreadsheet. It all represents data that is already formatted. It all represents data that we know about in there. And we have to know where that data, that reporting resides. And sure, again, if we look at our CIS 102 example, are there too many CIS 102 classes in a year to make that possible? Not in 1 year, but in 2 years, that's becoming hard to manage. How about 5 years? Really, really hard to manage. So the scale of the data that we're collecting, the amount of different data points that we need, and I'm going to use the word here, rapidity. I don't know if it's a real word, but how rapidly we need to get that data out means an Excel spreadsheet is not good enough. So we need another different tool, and that tool happens to be the database. A database, speaking of the rapidity, the speed with which things happen. Let me just tell a story, and you can kind of see the difference between an Excel spreadsheet and a database. So if you think back to when you signed up for TikTok or Instagram or Threads or Mastodon or any service it is that you use on the web, a new Gmail account, pick your service, there it goes. If we relied on Excel spreadsheets, this is what would happen. You would fill out a form someplace on the web. You would put in your username, you would put in your, contact info, you would put in your credentialing info, so things like your password, your recovery questions, things of that nature. You would hit submit on that form, and weeks later, you would get an email saying, "Congratulations, your account is now active. You can finally start using our service." The problem would also be that there would be no pictures instantaneously. So if you did a search for something in YouTube, let's say, so CIS 102 access videos, that would only come up after somebody has gone through and made actual links to actual videos in an actual table someplace so that it could be viewed out on the web. That would take forever. We don't do that, right? That's not the experience we have when we sign up for a product or a service. When I go to sign up for a new Threads account, when I go to sign up for a new TikTok account, whatever the case might be, I go through, I fill out my credentialing information, my username, my password, my recovery, those things, and then instantaneously, everything can be populated in the app. Everything can be populated in a web interface. Everything works the way we anticipate it to work, and that's only because of the structure and the capabilities that are built into databases. So now that we've looked at kind of the differences and the similarities between Excel and databases, let's, in the next video, just talk about databases so that we can get a handle on how they're structured and how they're used.